So as we start to, as we start to write these things, I just have to clarify a few things that are not my doing, but these are guidelines because the college has a big hand in this process, okay? This is not something that we can work together on. This is something that is an individual thing everybody has to do on their own. And I will just prime you in advance. The college goes to some strange lengths to make sure that you didn't work with other people, okay? So just do yourself a favor. The stakes aren't so high, just do this yourself. If you wanna work with somebody while you're taking notes and talking about it when we're sizing up some of this stuff, totally fine. I think a lot of people's assessment of different elements about this business case are going to be similar, but some of those things are just objective things that are laid out in the case. But the biggest and most important element about this is going to be that you are going to make recommendations to this company. So we just can't have everybody's stuff following the exact same narrative. You're going to find as we go through this that a lot of it is very subjective to what you think the best alternative is for them or what recommendations you would suggest to them. But you'll understand that there are a ton of things you can focus on. There are a lot of different recommendations you could give. It's just what ones you think are best and then justifying the suggestions that you provide. And we'll talk about how we do that today because I want to help you feel prepared to do this. But just understand, like, just do yourself a favor. Do it solo. Okay. We just need to make sure of that. The college is going to check for those kinds of things. And we actually have some really neat software from like the Wharton research database that actually lets us put two people's writing in there. It'll actually look for words that associate closely with one another and looks for the same thought patterns using different words even. It's a very cool software, but it's really weird. You can come to the conclusion of whether or not two people work together and just changed words. So it's a very interesting thing. It's a part of the Turn It In platform that we use here. So just do yourself a favor. This thing's worth like 11% of your grade in here. If we go over this outline part and you just do your due diligence for this, this is not going to be something that's going to be a make or break thing for you, but it is a requirement for the college, something that I do want us to take seriously, which is the reason why I canceled our chapter for this week, because I don't want you to have to focus on doing that quiz or paying attention to the chapter this week. This is what I would prefer you pay attention to once you get it. Now, there's also a strict window of time that they provide us. Everybody in the AACSB business schools gets 1 week to do this. And when this thing is due a week from Friday, so we're going to give this to you, give you access on Friday. You'll have to, the college doesn't require everybody to purchase the case, but I'll have a Harvard business pack that you can purchase. It's just $5. So it won't be anything real strenuous, but you'll need to go ahead and purchase this for yourself. It'll basically check that each person has like purchased the case. So make sure you get that purchase and then you have a week. On that next Friday when this is due, it has to be in by then. This isn't something that I dictate. This is the stuff laid out by the AACSB. Nobody can have more than a week. So if you don't get it turned in by then, I'm really sorry, but I have to stick to the college and the AACSB's requirements on this, and I can't let you hand it in late. So it has to be in by that time, okay? So do your due diligence, just jump on this. This is why I'm giving you this weekend to start like framing it out, taking notes or things like that and what you want to talk about so that you don't have anything else competing in this class for that time. Just want to provide you the time to focus on this, okay? And I know this kind of hypes it up to be kind of a seemingly big thing. It kind of is, but if we go through this today and you just follow the suggestions that I'm providing you in here, I'm even going to give you the outline for it. I would like to be as helpful as possible. I'm even going to tell you the exact areas that you need to include in order for you to cover all the necessary stuff, okay? I'm going to give as many suggestions and helpful tools as possible for you to use. Then you just have to utilize them, all right? Throughout that week also, I cannot help you. This is not something that you can have any type of instructor assistance on. So if you got questions on whether or not you think you're using something correctly, I'm sorry, but I can't answer that for you. This is going to be your take on the situation, all right? But hopefully once we go through this, I'm going to give you kind of a best practice step by step, first of all, like how to approach this thing. And this was through something that I was provided and taught when I was in graduate school, because like when I was getting my doctorate, we usually take like usually 2 to 3 research seminars at a time each semester for your first 2 years. And each of those classes we have, like, this is a case study and it's only about 9 to 10 pages long. It's not a really long one or anything, but you know, pieces of research can get really dry if you've read them for other classes sometimes. Sometimes they're not too interesting. Well, each of those seminars per week, we'd have 16 weeks where you'd have like 400 to 500 pages worth of research per class per week to go through. And then they made us present on all of them in our like course meeting for 3 hours each week. So you had to get really good at figuring out a concise way to get through this kind of stuff. So I'm just going to give you some best practices of how I got through that kind of stuff, some steps you might go along to help you kind of digest it well and start organizing in like complex information to help yourself get the gist of it best. Okay, so that's really what we're going to do today. I'm going to walk through how we would approach it, and I'm going to go through what elements need to be in your paper, what those basically consist of, and then I guess I want to just also prime one last thing, because this is always a question I'll get from everybody. No, there's not a length requirement. And no, I don't have much other information for you about how long it should be. That's all you're going to have to make, okay? But what I do is I talk in here about what constitutes whether you thoroughly answered something or not. So I think as long as you can check those things off, you can feel all right about how thorough you were in your response to some of the things we're going to talk about, okay? So in essence, really your role for this case analysis and what we do this for is just going to be, we want you to read this case, diagnose what's going on, size up the situation, look for problems, and then recommend appropriate action for the company, okay? Nothing more complicated than that. Sometimes there's just a lot of information, so hopefully what we go through here is going to help you organize that and handle that best you can, okay? It is not intended to be a surface level, super easy thing to do. So just to prime you in that, doing your due diligence with me, this means you want to think about it a little bit, okay? So if nothing else, just think about it kind of like this. We've gotten rid of completely that project you're going to do for this class. We're not doing that. We got rid of your chapter this week for it. I was talking with some students. I am heavily considering whether or not there's going to be added value to even having that final exam in this class at this point. So we've got like what, 3 more weeks or something like that. Just consider this to probably be like your last thing to really take seriously in college. Get through this, you're done, okay? So let's think of it that way. But make sure you provide some quality to the last thing you're doing here. That's going to be just a big thing, because the college is going to look at these. I'm not the only person assessing these, all right? And that's another reason why I'm gonna also stress on here, make sure you try to write this thing well, which means, at least use the damn free Grammarly software you're provided at the university. Like, I get some really interestingly worded things, or like some really interesting formatted things in some of my classes. Don't let this be one of those. Let this, like, look at this as if you were going to actually provide this as a strategic recommendation to this organization, and this was going to be their first signal of like how to size you up and whether or not to take your suggestions seriously or as legitimate. They're going to look at that document first before they know you. Just make sure that you provide a document that reflects the way you would like to be perceived, okay? Make sure it looks good, run it through, check it again before you turn it in. I know like one of my peers that teaches this class, if any of you ever had Dr. England, like in her class, if she runs things through Grammarly after people turn it in, if there's even one misspelled word, it's an automatic 10% off of your grade. So I'm not gonna be that weird about this kind of shit, but do your due diligence and go through it. Just make sure that it's looking all right. I don't think that's too hard. You have a software that does it for you. So just make sure you do that. I just want to stress that pretty heavily here, okay? So as we're priming for the case, we want to kind of like setting correct expectations for ourselves, super important. Let's just get an idea about what this is really all about first. The biggest clarification I can provide you is it's going to be a really stupid waste of your time if you sit around worrying about whether or not the things you've chosen to recommend is the right recommendation. It's not the point. There's not a right recommendation in this situation. It's about, are you going to be doing your due diligence to explain and justify why you think it's the right course of action? Okay. And how we justify and legitimize those arguments is we find something to help validate why we think it's going to lead to something good. Okay. We can do that using established research. And a really, really good thing for everyone in here is we say ultimately the test of whether or not recommendations for strategic action are good or bad is, do we have a likelihood that we feel like it's going to lead to better performance for the firm in some capacity, however you want to represent better performance. There's a whole lot of ways we look at performance in a lot of ways, but the thing that's good for everyone in here is the biggest plethora of research in business in general, the largest capacity of it looks at firm performance as the outcome. Like, this is the biggest collection of research there are. There's thousands of studies out there that look at how tons of different things lead to better performance. So if you're making a recommendation, I'm going to put some links on the assignment page there for you to some places where you can search for research. It's not any harder a lot of the time than to put in, let's think, what construct associates with what we're suggesting. If we're saying they need to expand internationally, let's say, just as a hypothetical situation, you can go into these databases and put like international expansion performance. It'll bring anything that has like keywords to associate with the relationship between those things. And from there, you can say, hey, there was a study that showed expanding internationally leads to better performance for organizations. So this is why I suggested that. Boom, that's what you got. There's tons of it. You just have to go look for it real quick and make sure you cite whatever it is that led to your conclusion. We'll talk about that here, but right or wrong is not something to focus on at this point. It's, am I justifying my suggestions or not? You're like, I'm sorry to say, and I know this is just like a terrible realization for most of us, but your opinions aren't worth shit in this situation until you bring somebody else's opinion into it, unfortunately, right? Something that's been published somewhere, some research you did on the internet somewhere. There are tons of different places you can get something to help validate an argument that you made, but you just want to provide that. We just can't have you say, I feel like this is the right thing to do. Because inevitably, right, I told my 8 a.m. class, like, even if you get to the point where you are an expert in this area, which, we're not quite there yet. But if you get to that point, like when I wrote my dissertation to get my doctorate, the reference page of my dissertation was almost 60 pages long, because they won't take anything that you say at face value. You make any type of claim, everybody wants to know what the hell makes you think that. So just think of it critically from that standpoint. If there's something you really want to suggest and you're like, well, if you're making a claim, it's going to increase performance in some way. We just want to give something that says other people have shown that this is the case. And it doesn't have to be that everybody agrees. Very rarely in research or science in any capacity do all people agree on something. But if we have backup from somewhere and it got published, that's valid enough. You can say there's at least some research suggesting this, and that's fine. That's totally fine for you, okay? And I'll give you access to some of those databases. I'll put a little thing in the announcement or in the assignment on Canvas that helps you find that kind of stuff. I don't know if anybody in here has ever used Web of Science, but if you haven't, it's really one of the absolute best websites that exists for finding any type of research. It's really fantastic. I'll show you how to use it. But as we're priming for it here, we kind of talked about this. Here we go. Let's get into this. Once we get to the case, I think that, it can feel just a little bit overwhelming to do these things. I feel like it's supernatural if you feel like you're inadequate to, provide strategic suggestions at this point. We've kind of talked about these things in pretty good isolation in here, but it's your time to give this damn thing a shot. So let's figure out how we organize a lot of information so that we can start making sense of it. So these are kind of the steps that were also just taught to me throughout my doctorate. And if we're going to try to bring in a whole bunch of information and input, we're going to try to organize it, make some sense of it, and provide something of value that's unique to add to this situation. Our best practices usually follow these lines. And the first one is probably when I send this to you on, I believe it's going to be Friday, but I will clarify that fully with you prior to that. Make sure, just go through it once quickly. Don't sit down and try to, digest every little detail of things your first time through. Just go through and give it a skim so you get an idea what's going on in this situation. This will give you a really good, like a baseline or a foundation in your mind about the big picture of things, okay? The minutia will come later. Go through something, make sure you understand just the situation at a high level. It's kind of like creating sort of like when we talk in entrepreneurship, like creating an elevator pitch for your business. There's so much more to it. You could talk forever, but can you summarize it up in a minute for somebody what the most important things are? We get that by this first skim through. So give yourself an opportunity to get those initial details in mind. You wrap your head around it, and then when we go back through to read it more carefully, you don't have to focus on every little detail, but it's about, providing your mind better detail and backup to the things that you know about the case at that point, things that help solidify the importance of whatever's talked about in this case, okay? So I usually say, just give it 2 read-throughs like that. One should take a little longer than the other. And after you're done with that, I know we have kind of like a TLDR culture at the moment. The case is in total, I think like 16 pages, but I said like 9 to 10, right? Because that's the content. But I know when we look at it, when we get a case, we're like 16 pages. Then you look at it and you're like, oh, there's only 10 of writing. It's only 10 pages, right? Probably don't even look at the tables and figures and shit, right? That's for somebody that's really interested in the case. Yeah, I understand. Okay. That's totally fine. But in this case, we do want to. If it's put into this Harvard business pack for you, it's because they provide some sort of valuable information. Now, what you choose to focus on in your strategic analysis may be different than other people. Some of those figures or tables may be more relevant to what one person focuses on than another, but just don't skip over them assuming there's nothing valuable for you in there. The really important thing from it is going to, honestly, it's going to come from what we'll talk about when I click on these here, because you're going to go through there, try to, record anything from those tables or figures you think might be important to the situation, taking notes along the way here, just trying to get a high level understanding of the situation, okay? Once you get there, start trying to identify what you think might be the problem in this situation. What type of signals and things like that have been given to you that something might not be working well, or that you might identify as a potential problem based off some best practice or something maybe you've learned along the way. And once you do that, then you start looking for what are artifacts from those tables and figures that will back up the, your inclination about what the problem here is. So I'm going to provide these all to you as well. I know we went through these earlier in the semester, and there are a lot of these different ratios, a lot of financial ratios to choose from. I put this table in here with these slides that I'll give you. You can go through here. Each of them gives a recommendation of, it basically is a definition, of what's this used for? Why is it important? What does it mean? How you calculate it. If you have information, you can calculate some of these things. There's going to be a financial implications part to this write-up. You can feel free to use anything in here you think is salient. Depending on what you're talking about, different things will be important to yours than other people's. So I've put a whole lot of different ones. We went over a lot of these, but I know that it's not something we tend to commit to memory, which is why I'm giving you all of these that give explanations for what they are. You start talking about things that if you have the elements that make up some of these financial metrics, it might be an opportunity for you to try your hand at a very simple calculation in the financials part. and try to project what you think the implications of your suggestions are going to be based off the information the case gives you. It's not about, again, being right about your projection. It's about trying to make a projection that is at least somewhat based in this information we've given you, okay? You don't have to worry about it being correct. Just don't make an asinine claim that isn't based in anything. That's all. Essentially, any place that you possibly can, make sure that you're just backing up what you're saying. If you think, let's say that, I know that this would probably be one of probably the most in-depth examples of this, but let's say you did go find a piece of research and you are giving an example and you're saying, I think that increased marketing effort here is going to lead to better performance. The problem here is I don't think that they're focusing on the right strategic marketing efforts or anything like that. And I think they should do that because there's this research that says there's a positive relationship between increasing marketing effort and increasing performance. That's a positive relationship there. You go into a paper like that, like I'm saying, you don't have to go into this depth, but I'm just trying to explain. If you have a correlation between these things or a regression, it should tell you the strength of what the impact of increasing your marketing is. So if we look at that just from a strict sense of, maybe we find something that says, there's about like a 20% variance or like 20% or 0.2 impact between these two. Take your current financial projections and add 20% to them and say, that's my projection. I think that this is about the strength of the relationship. So I think we could grow performance by 20% based off of my suggestion. It's a super basic way of doing it, but it's something you're providing that's saying you're thinking about the situation. I don't need everything you put into here to be foolproof. That's not the point of it. I want you to be thinking about how you could prove that. It's actually much more an exercise in being able to give validated suggestions to people. Okay, that's really all it's about. There's likely with anything you write with these kinds of things to be somebody sitting across from you and being like, all right, just think about each time you write something on here, somebody sitting across from you going, all right, so why do you think that? You're really sitting down and you're consulting with somebody and you say, I think you should do this. They have every right in the world to be like, why do you think that would be a good idea? And most people don't take kindly to you being like, I just feel like this is the right move. At this point, maybe later in your life, some of you are going to be, business consultants with years of experience behind your back, and you going somewhere and saying, I feel like this is the right move. That'll matter for something. But let's just assume we're entering the industry at this point, and we have to build a little more legitimacy at this point than that. So make sure that you validate and back up things that you say. There's a lot of places you can find that, where you choose to find it, what research you choose to use, where you choose to search for it, any of that stuff, that's all up to you. It's your choice. You use whatever you think validates it best, but just make sure you provide something more than your opinion. That's really the big thing with these, all right? So once we get through, that element of things, we've primed, we've started taking notes. We're doing some initial maybe number crunching, looking at what's important from these different ratios we provided. If there's something you want to use there, at the end of the day, you don't have to. That'll be a choice again that you're going to go ahead and make. We've given you a number of toolkits up until this point to help you make sense of some of these things, stuff like our 5 forces analysis, the pest analysis, SWOT analysis, these different things. Use some of those frameworks and tools. There's a reason that every single strategy class teaches those, is because they're a useful way of organizing this information. You're going to start applying those in your notes, maybe put, headers in some notes or something and say, what in here would actually be relevant to talking about SWOT? What's relevant within this case study that might relate to the 5 forces? Make sense of it later. Just put different things that you read in there, and then later you can trim those down and figure out what's important to what you're talking about and throw the rest away. That's fine. But you want to make sure you organize that information like that. These are just the steps starting to make some sense of it for yourself, okay? So you'll go through, basically make judgments about whether or not you think there's any validity to some of the things you're starting to write about, where you need to back those things up, support those with evidence if you can find it from somewhere within the case or within anything else you go out searching for, any research you do or articles you might read, anything like that that suggests there's some link between two things. That's fine way, but we just want to make sure we validate those things. And then when we get to the end, the most important thing of the entire process and the thing that really is going to be most important to writing a good strategic analysis is recommendations. And I'm going to go into the outline, the format of what this paper should look like. This area, if you can commit to anything to memory about this, recommendations should be your most robust area. Okay, this is the point where now you're bringing your personal element to this. You're bringing your suggestions. You're telling why you would suggest that. And you're backing up that information saying why those might lead to something good. Okay, and that's what we'll be doing. So my last suggestion here is, I know that we prime this up a lot and makes it seem heavy, makes it seem important. Obviously, it is an important thing for you, but I don't foresee this being something to like get anybody in trouble in this class grade-wise, as long as you just try doing the things I'm outlining here today. All of us are at a varying level of like adequacy with doing this right now. That's totally fine. Just give it your damnedest. This is just one thing I don't suggest to people to half-ass on. Just try to give me your best work. Like I said, just think about it as it's like pretty much your last big thing you got to do. Just make sure you put some quality work into this. This is an important thing for you, okay? Don't worry too much about whether or not you got the right suggestions. Just worry about justifying the things that you are suggesting, okay? This is just about finding something to back it up. So, I understand that some of the time that's time consuming and frustrating. You bet, I do research. So, and there's not a more like scrutinizing group of people in the world than your peers who like block your way into getting your research and shit published. Like I just got a article like 2 weeks ago accepted in really good journal in our field, and I submitted it for its first round of review in the fall of 2017, and it just got accepted. We've been going back and forth fighting about different shit with it this entire time. It's taken 5 years just to be reviewed. So I totally understand the frustrating part about really justifying your arguments really well. We don't need you to go to any type of length like that here, but just if you're bringing your opinion forward, make sure you find somewhere that suggests somebody else validated that opinion somewhere, okay? We don't need it to be, publication ready here, but just try to do your due diligence. And you do that, we'll see that, and that's fine. Don't need it to be the best one I ever read, but just make sure that you cover your bases best that you can, okay? So, when it gets to the recommendations, because I did stress that this is one of the most important parts. If I can give you any suggestions, first and foremost, it would be don't give high risk suggestions. If you've determined that something you're going to suggest is going to, a fine line between it really paying off or, a lot higher odds that it won't, don't bet the company. Okay, this will be a definite wrong road to go down. I usually say it's not necessarily a wrong strategy, but in that sense, with this situation, that's a wrong strategy. Don't take that strategy. Don't suggest anything. I usually give the suggestion, think about it from a managerial standpoint. If you were the manager in this company, if you're not comfortable pulling the trigger and making this decision, if you wouldn't be comfortable doing it, don't suggest it for another company. Okay? Pretty simple thing. I like line to adhere to in this situation. So the big things are when you're determining what you think your suggestion should be, there's like 4 characteristics here that I think you should pay attention to and maybe at least address even briefly when you give your suggestions. You want to make sure that you can argue why the suggestion you're giving is possible for that organization, right? Is it something that they could implement, which kind of goes along with that last one. Is it realistic? So it needs to be something that is a realistic option and something that this company actually could do. You want to think about the workability, which really just means, you think this this firm actually has the personnel and like those skills and abilities to do that? And then does the suggestion that you're providing, does it align with things that that organization has the capability to do as well, like its competencies? Does it align with those things, right? Because you remember we've talked so much about the importance of strategic resources and capabilities, because those are often the things that we use to craft a strategy and how we run the entire, route of the business going forward from. So if we can give suggestions that align with the things we do well already, fantastic, right? We've talked about this a number of times. That's what gives away to competitive advantage for us, which at the end of the day is really what we're all about all the time. So if you can, or you just want to think about, if you're giving a suggestion, make sure it's something that can be implemented. It's something that is realistic. And if you can make it be something that aligns with something that that company already is capable of doing, if it utilizes a resource they have already or a capability they have, great. That just makes it even more realistic for you. It's something they can pull off. That's awesome. Okay. So yeah, essentially, that rule of thumb here, I think I went over already and just said, yeah, if it's not something you'd be willing to do, don't do it. Okay. This is supposed to be an exercise to show that if given the opportunity, you could provide some smart suggestions. You can kind of think about it as, let's think about you're writing this for an audience that you might want to be like, if you're doing a strategic or you're doing like some sort of business analysis for them to give them suggestions, you're doing advising for them, think about them as a potential recurrent customer. So don't bring them suggestions here. They're going to make you look like a complete bonehead and they're not going to want to use you again, right? That's the whole point. Just try to come up with something that you're like, all right, somebody read this. They actually would still be willing to talk to me in the future about this. That's fantastic. Let's just try to align it with that kind of thinking in this situation. So, and that also goes back to before when I said, just make sure you're checking this thing, it's well written and it looks good. Okay, that's really an important element about this. And then otherwise, avoiding making like overly generalized statements. Telling me that an organization needs to focus on leadership or something like that, I don't know what the hell that means, right? That could mean a whole lot of things. So if you do think that, you better follow it up with something. So specifically, I think this is what needs to be, looked at. If you think that they've got to improve their market position or something like that, you got to set forth, talk a little bit about the specifics of what you might suggest they do, what kind of actions need to be taken, and who would you suggest be the people that implement those things. Just try to give a best, plan of action to people so that you give some specifics. So it's not just something like they need to plan more. Okay. Basically, the high level idea about this entire class, the reason this is your capstone is, this entire class is about planning. I mean, essentially, it boils down to that. So saying that an organization needs to plan more, in this hypothetical situation, that's what they're doing and that's what they hired you for. That's what they're trying to do. So, hopefully some of those things should go without saying. All right. So just using super generic, broad, sweeping comments like that isn't going to necessarily win you any points. If you're going to make them, get more into the detail of that, of like what you might suggest they do. That's fine. This is about your opinion on it. Just understanding that if you're given that opinion, like we've said, just try to back it up with something. Say why you think that way. What influenced your conclusion? Okay. So here's what it should look like. These will be these sections. Outside of this, you do these sections, you're set up right. Okay. So you can take my word on that one. These are the elements, the sections you need to be a part of this write-up. So like I said, you can take whatever liberties you want about how long each of these are, what they include, all that different stuff. But at the end of the day, you definitely have to include these areas, okay? I would suggest starting it off by making sure that you make a clear, explicit statement, basically framing the situation, right? If you were going to give a quick overview, really quick, of the situation, what's the issue going on here? Give me a quick, down and dirty overview of it. This is your introduction, usually, right? We want to try to put something. It's just good writing practice from a writing standpoint that we try to kick this thing off with something that catches people's attention maybe a little. Use some statistic or something about the importance of whatever it is you're going to talk about later, or some element about it. The nice thing is, this case study that you're going to use is an actual business. So while we're encouraging you to do your own research, you should feel a little better that there will be some information about this place out there, because if this business has attracted enough attention to be in a Harvard business case, somebody else has written about them somewhere. Okay, so you can go find anything else that might not be a part of this you might think is important too. That's up to you. Whatever the hell you want to go try to find about it, world's at your fingertips, okay? But make sure you start this off by kind of priming the situation. Make sure you get people in the right headspace. This is a super important thing. We always say, like, that first couple sentences of anything you write is the most important, because you want to get people frame their mind in the correct manner, get them start thinking along the correct line, lead them into what you're going to be talking about. So why this part should look really different for different people too is because you might all focus on completely different things about it. So you start off by priming them about something that's going to get them thinking about whatever you talk about in your analysis, okay? Now, once you get through that and you've just given a quick overview of the central issue, what's going on in this case, get somebody up to speed that maybe doesn't know about the case, we're going to utilize, we remember back to the Porter's 5 forces model, where we talked about how do we determine the overall, like, rivalry and competition within our industry? Like, what does the industry look like? You're going to go ahead and do this. So that next part, that industry analysis, it better include all 5 of these forces. And I would suggest writing a small amount about each of the 5. I would break them up. They're distinct different things. It's a formative construct, which means everything put together is the 5 forces, but each of these is distinctly its own thing. Okay, so remember, just to remember, I'll give you these notes and everything. Those are some quick, easy questions to make sure that you try to answer about the industry that this firm is operating within. If you need to find more info about it, you can go search around, see what else you can find on it if you want to add more to these, or you don't think you have enough information about one of them. But we did specifically choose the case based on the fact that it should adequately address all of the elements that we ask you to go over in this one. Because some cases, they're really focused on something minute or something, but in this case, it should have all the strategic elements outlined in it for you, okay? So you'll go through there, make sure that you talk about each of these. Once you've gone through your industry analysis, you've sized up what does the industry look like that they're operating within, and then, remembering that we categorize these as either high, moderate, low, but just give a grade to each of them. How would you assess that force right now in that industry? Tell me why. If you think, barrier to entry or something or high, just tell me why you think that. What from the case told you that that was the case? Just tell me that. Salient information, something we want to know, okay? Once you get through that, you're going to graduate upward a little bit. If we remember about, like, the hierarchy to all of this, if we think about the hierarchy of the forces impacting business, we've got 5 forces right here. We kind of like move up a level. When we're talking about environmental analysis, we talked about effective analysis many weeks ago. These are like our highest level forces that impact business in general, right? It's not just within our industry. So these get to be like higher level economic forces usually. These are going to be things that impact world economy, all of these things, but different elements to each of this pestle analysis all impact an individual business differently depending on what it does, right? There may be technological, trends in the larger environment that impact my business very differently than yours. I might talk about them more than yours, right? So we look at political, economic, social, technological, legal, environmental issues through here. I'm going to tell you what, there's probably no other topic in all of strategic management that there is more written about than the pestle analysis. You can find it sometimes just the pest analysis you'll see on there. There's a shitload of information about how a lot of these forces impact different industries specifically. You figure out what industry is going on in here, there's a lot of information about what forces are salient to it. So there's a lot of information out there about these things. Basically, as a quick overview of these, just to refresh people around, if like political stuff is going to be talking about what, what maybe tax policies, maybe if there's been changes in like tariffs or trade restrictions, if that's salient to what you're talking about. It could be like governmental stability. It could be immigration policies, be all sorts of things like that. Anything that's a big political factor that you think might impact something about how this business operates or some decision that they're making, I would make sure that you talk about at least something you can identify in each of these areas, right? Economic is just going to be basically anything that you think is impacting money can potentially be an economic factor. Could be, interest rates, inflation rate, GDP, the company they operate within, unemployment rates. Because if we're saying, something like we need to gather more like high level talent for this organization or something like that, and we have, unprecedentedly low employment rates, that might be a problem because we might not have the labor available, especially the like hyper specific labor that we might need in this situation might not be available. So we talk about things like that, right? So anything from an economic standpoint that might impact it, things in sociological, the sociological area are going to be like factors like trends in demographics, or like you might even think about it sometimes as like the trend in human consciousness at the time. What are the social narratives moving around right now? Like this is a great example of it right now. Is like a heightened interest in funding and moving like Black businesses forward. This has been a huge sociological trend. When we have a situation that talks about something like that, like investing in Black-owned business, like those are sociological trends that are an artifact of our time, but they might be something that's salient to the business you're talking about. It doesn't have to be that. That's just an example. Technological trends. How's technology changing? How might that impact this company doing business here and in the future? Legal elements, right? Stuff like employment laws, health, safety regulations, anything legal, how the courts impact doing business, and then environmental, like this is actually talking about natural environment. Okay, so regulations or restrictions from an environmental standpoint, it could be customer attitudes, like it says here, about the environment or what harm our company might be doing. Sometimes, as you can see, there can be a little bit of overlap with some of those between like the sociological part and some of these other ones, because some of the time the attitudes about certain elements of like the environment and legal policy and things like that can seep into it. There is some overlap some of the time. So you just do your best to try to argue what element you think could fit into each of these that might be impacting the way to do business in this situation. All right. Like I said, there's a lot of information about how each of these different economic forces might impact different industries. So if you look out there for information about which forces are salient to a specific industry, you come to find that this firm operates within in the case study. You'll have some good insight into which ones of these might be important, and it'll help you kind of frame and start talking about which one you think might be important in this situation. But they're probably going to outline those in the case for you, okay? Because we made sure that all of these elements are present in some capacity in this case. get through the external environment, all that kind of stuff. We framed it up at that point. Now what we want you to focus on is we're going to write a little section on what's the current strategy for this firm. So based off what you just read in the case, what's the strategy or the strategic approach that that firm is currently taking, okay? And you don't have to, like, to really clarify, you do not have to go over everything about the case, okay? What you want to talk about is what elements of their strategy have you identified that are adding to or are salient to the problem you've identified, right? So you started this thing off by saying, this is the central issue. This is what I think the problem is here. So then you talk about what elements of their current strategy right now might be causing that to happen, or which elements of their current strategy are the problem. What are creating this problem for them? So what elements about their strategy right now might be fueling the fire at the moment or causing this to happen? So you don't have to talk about everything about their current strategy. Just go through and determine what elements you've been given in the case help to solidify in your mind that this is an issue. So really this is a test at this point of strategic omission, okay? You're gonna have way too much information. You're going to try to whittle that away to say, all right, which of these, like the notes that I took here, which information is actually relevant to what I'm talking about. And that's how we figure out what kind of shit we're going to throw out and not talk about. Because not everything in here is going to be salient to what you've decided to talk about. So it's all about pretty much every step along the way, find a way to align the narrative of what you're using. And I understand this can be a difficult undertaking sometimes, but a really good way that I've found for some people to wrap their head around it better and write this whole thing better is once you take all those notes, write your recommendation section first. After you've taken notes and start thinking about it, write your recommendations, and then you have a good idea of what your recommendations are and what you're arguing. Then go back and write these ones and include just elements that are related or salient to those suggestions that you gave, right? If you're not talking about some element of this, then you don't need to talk about the things relevant from the strategy that pertain to that, because you're not aligning the front part of your paper with the back end. And this is like a hard thing to do in like this kind of writing sometimes, but alignment just really makes it so that your analysis really clicks with people. It's really good because it's devoid of information that's not relevant. So just understanding, don't make this into something you have to saturate super huge with every damn bit of information you can find in here. That's not the point to this. It's about understanding what stuff's actually relevant to my narrative, and the other stuff that's important for somebody else to talk about some other element. Okay, so it's not about just saturating the living hell out of this document. It's just about figuring out what is important to include. Leave the other stuff out. Totally fine. Okay, so after we talk about that strategy, we want to try and frame what are the distinguishing characteristics of this firm. We've focused a lot this semester on the importance of strategic resources and capabilities. This is basically what we're talking about here. You know, what makes this firm unique? What processes, what activities, competencies, resources, anything that you read through there and you're like, it's kind of a distinct thing. That's something that maybe is unique about them that sets them apart. And the reason we focused on this so much throughout the semester is because those are often our gateway to competitive advantage, right? Things that are unique to us, our unique access to something, our unique ability to do something is what opens up that door and creates a competitive advantage where we have some unique position that our competitors do not, and that is our advantage over them, okay? And you remember, kind of our sights have been set over and over and over in this class on creating a sustainable competitive advantage. Well, we do that first by sizing up what do we think is unique in this organization, what distinguishes them and makes them unique from others, okay? To do that, you can talk about whether or not you think any of those unique competencies, capabilities, or resources, processes, activities, any of that kind of stuff you choose to focus on which of that gives way to a competitive advantage for them right now. Because remember, when we talk about the recommendations here, if we can align our recommendations with utilizing one of those points of competitive advantage, fantastic. Then you have like the absolute best type of recommendations, because you're utilizing things that other people can't copy and you do uniquely well. Okay, so we can find a tie between those things, fantastic. Once you've gone through all of these elements, then we're into recommendations, which is, I know I said I would suggest maybe start crafting that part first. You start thinking about what you think your recommendations should be, and then you figure out what should be included in the points leading up into it, right? So that we have good alignment between your two arguments. So give those recommendations. Then you can use some of those financial documents I'm providing you and different stuff to hopefully try to just give us an idea on, based off however you feel the performance would increase based off your suggestions. Because remember, the recommendations you give, whether or not they're good or bad, we say it based on, we would have a good likelihood of thinking this is going to lead to better performance than we're realizing right now. But we know performance can be measured in countless things, right? We have so many measures of performance. So whatever way you thought this was going to perform better as a result, go back into those financial ratios and those things, do an easy calculation with something, give us an idea of like a broad idea of what you might think, what might be the implications of this. You can choose what you want to look at, just depending on what kind of performance increase you're suggesting. Go through there and see if there's one of those that really reflects that. And you can do a simple calculation. It's nothing too complicated. We don't need you to do a full financial projection for this company or anything. We don't have adequate information to do that kind of stuff. So you're just giving a broad idea about what kind of performance are we talking about here? What's it going to materialize as based off of the information that I'm given here? And it's not going to be super in depth, so you don't have to worry about it being too complicated in that sense, but we're trying to get an idea on whether or not you have the capability to give a suggestion and then give an intelligent idea about what the hell is really going to happen if we go ahead and utilize this thing. People want to know that. That's how we use projections. That's how we make future plans. If you're going to, assess a business, give suggestions like this, some people want to know. Okay. And then once we've done that adequately, just make sure you've got a reference section. Make sure there's a good reference section at the end of that. Anywhere where you're using other people's work, put it in there. I don't care what kind of citing you want to use. Pick a format. I don't care. You want to do APA, go nuts. Do APA, but make sure you do APA for all of them. I don't care what kind of, inline citation, approach you want to use, as long as if you use one, use the same format throughout the paper. So consistency is all I'm going to care about. I don't give a shit which one you choose. Just make sure you do it the same way throughout so that, looking good. That's all I really care about. Okay. So once you get through that reference part, that's all there is to it. I know you have a week to get this thing done. Just to remind everybody again, right? Sorry to say, but the entire point of this is I can't help you out along the way. So I can't answer questions about this once we get to the launch date on this at the end of the week. So if you want, I know we've got some more time here. If anybody has questions, I'm more than happy to answer them right now for you, so that you feel as adequately prepared to try and tackle this as possible. So does anybody have any questions right now about what we're doing? Yeah. I think that, so there's varying levels for people who are on Zoom that maybe didn't hear that. They asked if they have to be from a library source or something official from the university. They do not, but oftentimes if you use a popular press article, they often put references at the end of those that tell you where they got their information. It might be good to cite their references in that capacity, because that might be a little more legitimate citation to use in that case. Just think about, just like with anything, different outlets that you can get information from come with varying levels of scrutiny and legitimacy. So just understanding that, you know, like, I don't know, I probably wouldn't use anything that gets super popular press, but if there's information within those that tell you where they got that information from, research or something like that, yeah, go ahead and do that. But business outlets, like anything like, you know, Fortune, Forbes, Insider, any of that kind of stuff, totally legitimate, totally fine by me. Not everything has to come from a research article. Okay? And you can use your book too. Your book's a definite resource. You can cite the book as much as you want. It's a peer-reviewed, published, you know, piece of business research in that sense that just synthesizes research for you. So it's totally acceptable if you find something that supports your suggestion from the book and you just want to cite Art Thompson's book. That's totally fine. Okay. Anybody else got any questions? All right, I'll stick around for a few. If you didn't get signed in, make sure you sign in. If you're on Zoom for me, if you'd put something in the chat real quick so I don't miss you, make sure that you get your attendance. I would appreciate if you put some in the chat. Otherwise, I'll stick here for a little while and you can let me know if you got any other questions. I'm happy to help you out.